Ladies and gentlemen, it's our Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and my guest today is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Sasha. I'm glad to be here as always.
Yes, it's always my pleasure to see you. Usually we have Ivan from
Yeah.
Kiev on Tuesday specifically, but well, maybe he will be a little bit later, so we'll let him anytime. But the interesting that I sort of made up the void of the videos that he's usually supplying very good video. And yesterday I saw one video myself. I found in Ukrainian domain. I'm not going to show it today. First of all, it's quite long, and second of all, it shows absolutely incredible ingenuity of Ukrainian fighters. They are inventing such stuff on a level right from the ground up. The fighting people, right where they are inventing absolutely incredible things. They have drones, small drones, which are actually they power them, and they see everything what the drones is. They see. So they identify, let's say they can do one with some almost innocent things. Like, for example, there is a Russian contingent, and let's see a soldier, he needs to go to washroom. Somebody just behind these things where they're. So with the drone, he's following him to the washroom, and then.
Ambushing him in the bathroom? Now,
Yeah,
that's mean. That's really mean.
You know what? It also makes a decision to show his face, but now he has to decide to show his face before he actually uses the washroom or after, which will be a more genuine expression on his face. Then another idea is to once he's being killed, to show expression on his face. First of all, they very, very early enough, these soldiers realize that they're being followed by drone. So they're looking up and they're quite worried about this.
That is amazing psychological warfare. Think about it.
Yes, it is.
They're not being. The Russians are realizing that they're not being stalked by human beings, by their soldiers, but by robots, and that those robots are relentless.
Absolutely. So no one can feel safe at any point, any time. Now, interesting development happened yesterday that one congressman, I think Joe Wilson, he proposed a new bill to Congress to create a lend-lease for Ukraine. It's how do they call it? Freedom First Lend-Lease for Ukraine that would allow Trump absolutely effortlessly to supply any type of weapons and ammunition and everything to Ukraine whenever he finds it. Now, something tells me that his last conversation with Mr. Putin was not very successful, because Putin and his spokesman Peskov, they actually cannot confirm or deny that conversation even happened. It's quite incredible statement. And Trump and U.S. commentators, they're not saying much either about, well, they don't deny that telephone conversation happened, but they don't elaborate much more on that. What's your opinion, Jonathan?
Well, it appears that the Trump team is becoming more flexible and more adaptive to the ongoing situation. They are not committing themselves, obviously, to forcing a solution of the type that they were talking about before. They're apparently not trying to force Ukraine into giving up territory. They're not trying to force a peace at any price just for the sake of having a peace. Not and certainly not a peace that rewards Russia in any way for its prior aggressions. So that is fascinating. What I also found fascinating in relation to this, speaking of the president's and the Secretary Hegseth's Iron Dome project, I saw a breakout of the proposed bill by the name of the Iron Dome bill, And I saw the breakout of all of the various funding projects that would go underneath this bill to create an Iron Dome equivalent over America. And I noted that what it does is it reinforces spending on a lot of existing systems, all the existing systems, expanding them, focusing on strategic defense, on ballistic missile defense and sensors. And I noted there is a hole in the Iron Dome. And it is one that we saw this coming, but they are devoting $900 million to research space-based interceptors. Okay, there's the hole. Because space-based interceptors can be, they would have to be satellite-based. They would have to be satellites and they would almost certainly have to be armed with lasers in order to be successful in intercepting intercontinental ballistic missiles.
So far, everybody is very quiet about using lasers. I haven't
No kidding.
one
No,
word.
not one. But I'm telling you, lasers are the ultimate in terms of being able to defend against ballistic missiles, because no ballistic missile can outrun a laser or outmaneuver a laser, and they certainly cannot outmaneuver a laser if it is positioned in space and able to target a nuclear missile in its boost phase when it has just been launched and it's on its way up. A ballistic missile in that situation cannot maneuver because it's trying to get speed to get to orbit. And it certainly cannot deploy decoys, not while it's in its boost phase. It has to wait until it's in mid-course phase, essentially in outside Earth's atmosphere. So you have that.
You just said in mid-phase course, because then, lasers, they're using some of their effectiveness in the atmosphere because of the natural factors.
Dispersion.
Yeah, once it's in stratosphere, it doesn't have any impediments.
And when you have a satellite laser, and that's why, unfortunately, in the 1997 Army After Next Winter War Game, lasers were simulated in the war game itself, but positioning satellites on lasers on satellites is a highly unstable. It produces a highly unstable and hair trigger situation in space, in which the side that strikes first has a decisive advantage. So it would provide an enormous temptation for Russian and Chinese counterspace weapons to target those satellites preemptively in order to destroy them before they would launch any conceivable ballistic missile attack. The way you get around that, the way you stop that, as we have discussed previously on this program, is for the Trump administration to do what would seem to be the most logical and natural thing, to upgrade the Space Force with a space fleet, with starships. Those starships would have lasers on them in low Earth orbit. And if the Russians and Chinese try to attack a U.S. Space Force starship armed with lasers, that is a clear act of war. And that imposes a much greater restraint on the ability of the Russians, Chinese, or even the North Koreans to attempt to disrupt Earth orbital space with their missiles. So logically, what I would think that someone, hopefully well placed, will suggest to these congressmen, because supposedly the $900 million is for research and development to figure out what the best space-based interceptor is. Well, I can save Congress about $900 million right now. I can tell them, give the Space Force starships, put lasers on them. We have the laser weapons. It's comparatively much easier than going through all this trouble trying to figure out, how are we going to intercept these missiles from space? Well, guess what? It's not. Well, I was going to say it's not rocket science, but it is rocket science. But it just happens to be very obvious rocket science.
And I think, Jonathan, there are a lot of things about lasers that we don't know about. And I'm pretty sure that at least the United States is testing lasers of different kinds, and they're just being quiet.
Yes, there are lasers. I am almost metaphysically certain, with metaphysical certitude, I can tell you there's lots of technology which is classified that we don't know about, that the United States has. It's those. It's like having cards down in a game of 7 card stud. The cards you can't see are the ones that can be decisive. And in this case, the classified technology that the United States has is going to be very decisive in producing a potential strategic surprise. But even from open sources, it is, to me at least, intuitively obvious that giving the Space Force a space fleet, mounting those laser weapons of whatever type on them from low Earth orbit is going to have a very decisive effect on the perceptions of the Russians and the Chinese, because it is in effect making real their greatest fear, using American technology to neutralize the one thing that makes the Russians or the Chinese major powers, great powers worth considering. And they've confessed. Yeah.
Jonathan, you remember the first time that lasers were actually used and very effectively? It was Damansky Island between Russia and China in 1969.
Oh.
Chinese troops, they went in attack trying to get this island because they believed it was part of China, and Russians, they had different beliefs. And although Chinese army was much superior, at least by numbers, Russians used for the first time ever lasers in combat, and very successfully. They were cutting tanks in half, and they were exposed. And it was more than 50 years ago, 55, 54 years ago. That's incredible. So at that time, lasers, at least what Russians had, they were quite advanced. So I'm pretty sure that now US may have even more stronger and better developed lasers, more effective lasers.
And during the Cold War, there were stories of lasers being used to blind helicopter pilots.
Mm-hmm.
And those, because especially if you were a soldier on a battlefield and someone used a laser against you, and the lasers went through the lenses and into your eyeball, that produced serious damage. That basically blinds the pilot or blinds the observer. So lasers have multiple uses, some of which, but in this case, I would submit that in the Iron Dome bill, that at least publicly, the visible weakness in the Iron Dome is its inability, or at least apparent lack of ability, to successfully intercept from space ballistic missiles in their boost phase. And that's the key. With intercontinental ballistic missiles, you have to intercept them in their boost phase. You cannot allow them to get into the mid-course phase where they can deploy their decoys or even maneuver to get around the intercepting ballistic missile defender.
Jonathan, there is something interesting that specifically in Russian information channels, they're lately saying a lot about that Trump, he's threatening so many things to so many people and countries and so on. But when it comes to do really something, he backs off and he's not. Possible. But now Trump actually created a very significant test of what he is capable or not capable to do. And this is with regards to Israel. He now threatens the Gaza and Hamas that by Saturday, all the hostages must be released. And if not, something will happen to them that never happened in the history of the world. How would you comment on that?
Well, he's doing a reverse version of intimidation that Putin had been using remember how the Russians refer to their nuclear forces as intimidation forces. They use the word "ustrashenia." And apparently President Trump is doing the world one better. He says, I'll show you what intimidation looks like.
And there is a date, there is a time.
Yeah.
It's a
He's basically a man. He's basically looking like a man who's holding the high cards in his hand in a game of poker, and he's pushing all of his chips into the center of the table, and essentially saying to his opponent, "Call or fold."
The problem is what's happened if his opponent is does not understand the game of poker at all. Actually, he never played poker in his life or her life, and he understands only very rudimentary things like to just shoot.
What if your opponent's a lousy poker player? Oh well, that could be interesting.
Well,
But
lousy poker player is something he may improve, but one who does not understand the poker game at all, he doesn't know the rule, and he doesn't care about the rule. He doesn't want to learn the rules. How you deal with an opponent like that?
well, in this particular case, you have to, in order to make almost an ultimatum like that, you have to be credible. You have to have a reputation. You have to be credible. You have to have your reputation that says to your opponent that your opponent actually believes that you might actually carry through with your threat. And the classic example of that was during the Korean War when President Eisenhower came into power. And essentially, he threatened to use nuclear weapons to end the Korean War. And you have to be believable. The opponent must believe that you will actually carry through with your threat.
But General MacArthur wanted to use nuclear weapons,
he wanted to use nuclear weapons at the wrong time, and he wanted to use it essentially independent of presidential authority. In which case, President Truman was quite correct to fire him, because the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time said getting into a war with China would be the wrong war at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and with the wrong enemy. So he was justified in doing it. But that subsequently, when President Eisenhower came into power, with his reputation of being the conqueror of Hitler, essentially, when he essentially threatened to use nuclear weapons to end the Korean War, the Chinese believed him. And everybody else believed Eisenhower too. They believed he was deadly serious, and so the Korean War was successfully ended with an armistice, if not a genuine peace. To this day, of course, it is an armistice. They are still both technically at war.
Hmm.
So in any case, but as for this Saturday, yes, that is a test, and we shall see who blinks.
Absolutely. Now, things is on Ukrainian front, Russians hardly can move even 100 meters a day, but keep losing almost 2,000 people a day. And this is absolutely incredible situation, never happened in history before, that one side knew that they will lose close to 2,000, maybe in some cases more than 2,000 people, because it's almost like every 20, 30 minutes there is a column of 100 soldiers. They're marching ahead, they're being decimated. In 30 minutes, the next wave of 100 people marching in. So, I mean, it's just incredible. I never seen it.
Well, we've seen in previous days we've noted where the Russians are using Ladas to ferry their troops into. They might as well be sending in troops in paper mache.
They're using donkeys now too.
Yes, donkeys. That's right.
By the way,
they are using donkeys to transport their logistics, which, of course, that was what they had to rely on in the Second World War, because it was basically so. In any counteroffensive, the Russians would have been highly limited. And it wasn't, as I pointed out before, it was because the U.S. was sending Ford trucks that gave the Russians any kind of mobile logistical capability at all that enabled them really to drive the Germans out of the Soviet Union. Otherwise, it would have been a very slow affair. And so now you have a situation where the Russians are similarly, their logistics has never been their strong point, because of lack of true logistical organization, corruption, the propensity of Russians to sort of pilfer from their own logistical system. So you have that problem, and they really is now showing up as the Ukrainians have been striking at the supply infrastructure and the industry of Russia, and further damaging their ability to sustain a warfighting capability. That is what is slowing them down. They are quite literally running out of gas, and running out of energy to be able to sustain an offensive. So
Another
now, yeah,
sorry, another very interesting commentary I've read also yesterday is that it's from one of the Russian dissidents, let's put it this way. Uh, the analysis was that to defeat Russia, it's not enough to supply Ukraine with the best and impossible quantities of warfare from United States and Europe, or to get Russia out of the oil and gas business entirely through sanctions and through many other things. Neither will work at all. But two of them put together, that will end the war in 2 months maximum.
I am inclined to agree because again, that once you have ground to the point where their offensive momentum has ceased altogether, then you have reached what Clausewitz calls the culminating point, where they have essentially reached the limit of their offensive capability, and it is now the defender now has the ability, providing the defender has gathered sufficient resources to sustain a counterattack, to go on the counteroffensive. And the Ukrainians have several choices. They can launch a counteroffensive. They can reinforce their Kursk offensive. They can launch a counteroffensive on another area of the Eastern Front to drive the Russians out of Ukraine in those areas. Or, as we discussed a number of times, Crimea is still a potential center of gravity, a decisive center of gravity, where the Ukrainians could cut off the Russians from resupply and reinforcement and use their strategic reserves that they have created to launch a counteroffensive into Crimea and force the surrender of the Russian occupiers. That is still very much a possibility. So now you have the situation where the Ukrainians are hanging in there. They are tactically withdrawn where they have deemed it necessary in order to preserve their forces and prevent them from being surrounded. They are not going for a suicidal hold at all costs, but they are withdrawing tactically and locally where it is in their best interest to do so. So now it's just a matter of it's taking on the aspect more of a battle of political will between the United States and its allies and Russia and whatever allies it's got. North Korea, whoopee. So the
North minus 5,000.
yeah. So it's not, and it's also interesting that the Europeans are going to want to be involved. The European members of NATO want to be involved in any peace settlement, which is also a very strong indication that Europe is not going to simply settle for an appeasement agreement just to stop the fighting. They want to make sure that Ukrainian security is guaranteed for the foreseeable future. And they are not going to accede to any outrageous demands by Putin for what amounts to unconditional surrender.
Well, that brings a completely new factor in the negotiating process, because right now Trump had all cards up his sleeves, and he could dictate to Russia one thing, to Ukraine other things, eventually make up a peace. There was a possibility of getting control of rare metals.
Yes.
Now Europeans may want their piece of action too. Now, the funny thing is that when I looked at it, most of these minerals are located in Donbass, which is controlled by Russia. It will take well over 20 years to really do the exploration, the analysis, start actually getting something out of the ground, and so on. It will be well beyond Trump's time. That's quite obvious. But anyway, he loves the concept that at least what we are supplying is not for nothing, like it was in Biden years. So now we have access. We don't have the minerals itself, but we have access, we have possibility with in a due time, with proper exploration and proper utilization of this property. So yeah, we can get something at the end of the day. Why not? It's better than nothing. Let's put it this way. Okay. So I don't understand what Europeans, what they have under control, most of this Russian frozen funds. We're talking about $350 billion. And that's other things that Trump already likes, the idea of using that as a collateral, or at least interest from these funds, pay for U.S. Supplying of all these weapons and so on. So it will be quite interesting. I don't see really that Putin can withhold all this pressure, except one thing. What Putin loves is a status quo. This is what's happening right now, that he can indefinitely fight, even if he is not making any progress on the front line, but he is there, he is pressuring, maybe one day Ukraine will, maybe they will change their government, although that's impossible while the war is going on, because Ukraine has in its constitution that they cannot have election while the war is still on. So all this quite interesting to see how it all will be resolved. And I think that something has to be resolved, I believe, this week with all these meetings in Europe, and that will be quite productive on new information. But all March will be also very interesting. And I think by the end of March, we will have indication of what's really happening and whether Russia will come to the table or they will continue. They will not refuse Trump openly. What they will do, they will try to prolong the stage to discuss what will be discussed and who is going to call whom first and where and when the meeting will take place. Or so they will play at that probably for next month. What's your opinion, Jonathan?
Well, once the war gets into March, once it effectively enters its fourth year, which is really unbelievable when you think about it, it's taking on the scale almost of like the First World War and the Second World War. In this case, on the Eastern Front, it is taking on those dimensions, and now with the, again, using the old favorite Soviet phrase, correlation of forces. The correlation of forces is moving even more strongly against Russia than it has been in the previous years. And so I predict that, again, going out on something of a limb, that March and after the month of March, that there will be an opportunity for the Ukrainian forces to launch a decisive counteroffensive in an area of their choosing. And that will force the issue and produce favorable conditions for at least an armistice, if not a fully negotiated peace.
What Putin is also playing one psychological card, and with Trump, he knows how Trump is prone to photo opportunities to enhance his image and so on. So now Putin is saying that on May 9th, there will be 80 years since victory in Second World War, and there will be a big celebration in Moscow. And guess what? Emperor Xi will attend this, and Trump will not, unless he will behave better, and then Putin will invite him as well. That is bizarre.
That is quite strange, and the President Putin and Premier Xi may discover that from President Trump that two can play this game of psychological warfare. Yeah, Trump knows how to play it just as well as they do, possibly better.
I don't think that Trump is dreaming about visiting Moscow on May 9th. Maybe he doesn't care that much about it.
Yeah, no, it's not something he lies awake at. He may lie awake at night thinking about some things, but that's not one of them.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Jonathan, we live in a very interesting time, and we will follow all the latest development. And thank you so much for today's program. And we'll see you same place, same time on Friday.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And all our listeners, please join us on Friday. Thank you very much. Glory to Ukraine. Bye bye, everybody.